summer I turned 12. My parents sent me to stay with my grandparents in their weathered farmhouse at the edge of Millbrook County. The property sprawled across 40 acres of untamed land, bordered by dark woods that seemed to press closer with each passing year. I'd visited before, but never for more than a weekend. This time, I'd be staying for 2 months while my parents sorted through their divorce. Grandma Ruth met me at the screen door, her thin arms surprisingly strong as she pulled me into a lavender-scented embrace. Grandpa Harold stood behind her, nodding his welcome with the same quiet reserve I remembered from previous visits. Their house smelled of old wood, mothballs, and something else, something earthy and damp that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. "We've set up your mother's old room," Grandma said, leading me upstairs. "Nothing's changed much since she was your age." The room was a time capsule from the 1970s, complete with faded flower wallpaper and a quilted bedspread that had seen better days. Through the window, I could see the backyard stretching toward the woods, and there, nestled between 2 gnarled oak trees, stood the shed. It was larger than a typical garden shed, built from weathered planks that had turned silver gray with age. A heavy padlock secured the door, and the windows had been boarded over from the inside. Even from this distance, something about it made my skin prickle. "What's in the shed?" I asked. Grandma's hands stilled on the quilt she'd been smoothing. "Storage," she said after a moment. "Old farm equipment. Nothing for children to concern themselves with." But the way she said it, the way her eyes darted toward the window and then away, told me there was more to it than that. That first week passed quietly. My grandparents kept to their routines, Grandpa tending his vegetable garden, Grandma baking and cleaning with mechanical precision. They were kind but distant, as if viewing me through a pane of glass. I spent my days exploring the property, reading, and trying not to think about my parents. It was on my 8th night that I first noticed something odd. A summer storm had rolled in after dinner, bringing sheets of rain and gusts of wind that made the old house groan. I lay in bed listening to the thunder when I heard voices in the yard. Creeping to the window, I peered through the rain-streaked glass. 2 figures stood near the shed, my grandparents, both in dark raincoats. Grandpa was working at the padlock, while Grandma held a covered lantern. When the shed door swung open, I expected them to go inside. Instead, they stepped back. Something emerged from the darkness within. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks. But then lightning flashed, illuminating the yard for a split second. 3 figures stood beside my grandparents' tall, impossibly thin, wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothing. Their faces were wrong, too long, too angular, like someone had stretched human features over a frame that wasn't quite right. They stood in a circle, my grandparents and these 3 strangers, heads bent together as if in conversation. The rain didn't seem to touch the newcomers. It fell around them, creating dry spaces in the grass. I must have made a sound because Grandma's head snapped up, looking directly at my window. I dropped to the floor, heart hammering, and crawled back to bed. When I finally worked up the courage to look again, the yard was empty, the shed door closed and locked. The next morning, I came down to find my grandparents at the breakfast table, as usual. Grandpa read his newspaper, while Grandma set out plates of eggs and toast. Everything seemed normal, except for the mud tracked across the kitchen floor, mud that led from the back door and simply stopped in the middle of the room, as if whoever had been walking had vanished mid-step. Storm was something last night, I ventured, watching their faces. Grandma's hand trembled slightly as she poured orange juice. Was it? I slept right through. Grandpa didn't look up from his paper. Best to stay inside during storms, boy. Dangerous weather in these parts. I spent the next few days watching the shed from various windows in the house. During daylight, it looked harmless enough, just an old outbuilding slowly succumbing to time and weather. But I noticed things. How my grandparents never went near it during the day. How birds avoided perching on its roof. How the grass around it grew in strange patterns, forming almost perfect circles. On the fourth night after the storm, I heard my bedroom door creak open. Grandma stood in the doorway, backlit by the hall light. "Can't sleep?" she asked, though I hadn't made a sound. "Just thinking," I said. She came in and sat on the edge of my bed, her weight barely making a dent in the mattress. Up close, I could see the deep lines around her eyes, the way her skin seemed paper thin in the moonlight. "Your mother used to be curious about the shed too," she said softly. "Always asking questions, always watching. But some things, dear one, are better left alone. Some friendships are complicated." "Friendships," I echoed. She patted my hand, her fingers ice cold despite the warm night. "Everyone needs friends, even old folks like us. Especially old folks like us. Now, promise me you'll stay inside during storms. Promise me you won't go near the shed." The next storm came 3 nights later. I lay in bed fully dressed, waiting. When I heard the back door open, I slipped out of my room and down the stairs, keeping to the edges to avoid creaks. Through the kitchen window, I watched my grandparents make their way to the shed. This time, 5 figures emerged. They stood in their circle again, and now I could hear fragments of their conversation carried on the wind. The voices of the strangers were like whispers made of static, words that hurt to hear. The exchange must continue. 40 years of secrets. The boy has seen. My blood turned cold. They were talking about me. I backed away from the window, but my elbow knocked a glass from the counter. It shattered on the floor with a sound like breaking bones. The conversation outside stopped. I ran. Up the stairs, into my room, under the covers like a little child. Heavy footsteps climbed the stairs, too heavy to be either of my grandparents. My door opened, and I squeezed my eyes shut, every muscle rigid with terror. "He's asleep," Grandma's voice said from the doorway, but it was wrong, layered somehow. as if multiple people were speaking in unison. "The blood runs true," another voice responded, "Grandpa, but not Grandpa. He'll understand in time. They always do." The door closed. I lay there until dawn, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. At breakfast, my grandparents looked older somehow, more fragile. Dark circles ringed their eyes, and Grandpa's hands shook as he lifted his coffee cup. "We need to talk about the shed," Grandma said without preamble. "The friends we keep there," she continued, They're not from here. Not from anywhere you'd understand. We made a bargain, your grandfather and I, back when we were young and foolish and desperate." Grandpa reached for her hand. The farm was failing. We were going to lose everything. Then one night, during a storm like no other, we found them huddled in our shed. "Travelers," they said, "lost between places." They offered us a deal: prosperity in exchange for shelter and conversation. "Conversation?" I asked weakly. "They feed on secrets," Grandma whispered, "on the dark things people hide. Every storm, we meet and tell them our sins, our shames, the things we've never told another soul. In return, they've kept us healthy, kept the farm running, kept us alive far longer than we should be." I stared at them. These people I thought I knew. "How old are you really?" They exchanged a look. "I was born in 1889, Grandpa said quietly. "Ruth in 1891. The room spun. "That would make them over 130 years old. But the price," Grandma continued, "is that someone must always tend them. When we're gone, someone must take our place. We thought, we hoped your mother would, but she ran far away and never looked back. Smart girl, and now you want me to." I couldn't finish the sentence. "Want?" Grandpa laughed bitterly. "No, boy, we want you to run too. Pack your things. We'll call your parents, tell them you're homesick. Leave today and never come back." But even as he said it, I saw the truth in their eyes. They were tired, so incredibly tired. Over a century of feeding secrets to things that shouldn't exist, of standing in storms and speaking unspeakable truths. "What happens if no one tends them?" I asked. They didn't answer, but they didn't need to. I could see it in the way their faces went pale, in the way they gripped each other's hands. "They'll come out," I said slowly. "They'll leave the shed and go looking for secrets on their own." Grandma nodded once, a tear sliding down her wrinkled cheek. That night, another storm rolled in. I stood at my window and watched my grandparents make their slow way to the shed. This time, I counted 8 figures emerging from the darkness. They were multiplying. I should have left, should have called my parents and demanded to go home. But I thought about my grandparents, prisoners of their own bargain, and about those things potentially roaming free, seeking secrets from unprepared souls. Instead, I put on my raincoat and walked out into the storm. My grandparents tried to stop me, but the friends, were already moving forward, drawn by fresh blood, fresh secrets. Up close, they were even worse than I'd imagined. Their faces shifted constantly, as if they couldn't quite remember what humans were supposed to look like. Their eyes were holes that seemed to pull at something deep inside me. "A new keeper," one of them whispered, and its voice was like wind through a graveyard. So young, so full of small shames and future sins. "He's just a child," Grandma protested, but her voice was weak. "Age matters not," another said. "Only the willingness to share, to feed, to shelter." They surrounded me, these impossible beings, and I felt their hunger like a physical weight. They wanted my secrets, the time I'd stolen money from my mother's purse, the lies I'd told at school, the cruel thoughts I'd harbored about my parents' divorce. Such small things compared to a lifetime of sins, but they devoured them greedily. "Enough," I gasped when I felt emptied out hollow. "That's all I have. For now," they agreed in unison. "But you'll gather more. Humans always do. And in return," one of them touched my forehead with a finger like frozen bone, and knowledge flooded in. How to tend them, how to keep them contained, how to survive the burden of being their keeper. And more promises of long life, of health, of prosperity. The same poisoned gifts my grandparents had accepted. They retreated to the shed then, sliding back into the darkness like smoke. I stood there in the rain, my grandparents flanking me, all of us bound now by the same terrible secret. "We're sorry," Grandma whispered. "We're so sorry," Grandpa echoed. But I wasn't listening. I was thinking about the weight of years ahead, the storms I'd have to face, the secrets I'd have to gather and share. I was thinking about my unborn children and grandchildren, and wondering which one I'd eventually damn to this same fate. The shed door closed with a sound like a coffin lid, and I helped my grandparents back to the house. They looked younger somehow, as if passing the burden to me had lifted years from their shoulders. That was 15 years ago. I still visit the farm, though I tell people it's to help my aging grandparents. They're in their 140s now, but look merely elderly, sustained by their bargain. I've added new boards to the shed, reinforced the lock, planted thorn bushes around it to discourage the curious. And when the storms come, I go out to meet our friends. There are 12 of them now, always hungry, always waiting. I feed them secrets my own and those I've gathered from others. I've become quite good at getting people to confess their hidden shames. It's amazing what people will tell you if you just listen with the right kind of attention. Sometimes I think about burning the shed down, about breaking the cycle. But I know what would happen. They'd escape, spread out into the world, seeking secrets wherever they could find them. At least here, they're contained. At least here, the damage is limited to one family's curse. My daughter is 8 now. She's starting to ask about the farm, about why we visit so often, but never stay long. She's noticed the shed, asked why it's always locked. Storage, I tell her, the lie bitter on my tongue. Just old farm equipment. Nothing for children to concern themselves with. But sometimes, during storms, I catch her watching from the window, watching and wondering, just like I did, just like my mother must have before she had the wisdom to run. I pray she'll be smarter than I was. I pray she'll run too. But the friends in the shed whisper differently. They say the blood runs true. They say she'll understand in time. They always do. And so the cycle continues, generation to generation, secret to secret. The shed stands eternal, a monument to desperate bargains and the price of survival. Inside, our friends wait patiently for the next storm, the next feeding, the next keeper. Sometimes, late at night, I can hear them moving in there, restless in their confinement. They whisper through the cracks in the wood, promising things: knowledge, power, freedom from death. All lies, of course, or perhaps not lies exactly, but truths twisted into chains. My grandparents still live, sustained by their original bargain. My daughter grows more curious each day, and I stand between them, keeper of secrets that should never have been kept, guardian of things that should never have been sheltered. The next storm is coming. I can feel it in my bones, a gift from our friends, this ability to sense the weather. My daughter will be visiting next week. I've already decided to send her away before it arrives, make some excuse, but I know she'll return eventually. The shed calls to our bloodline, and our friends are patient. They have all the time in the world,